If you're buying a home this year, chances are good the marketplace is pretty competitive. There's limited inventory, buyers are still out in droves despite interest rates on the rise, and it doesn't seem like prices are going anywhere. If you're in the market right now, chances are good you're going to be in a competitive situation, and you need to be prepared for that. There are some tried and true strategies you can use to win multiple offer situations, and today we're going to talk through some of the most successful ones I've seen. Admittedly, nobody wins every multiple offer situation. I've lost before, I'll lose again. That said, I have a pretty good track record when it comes to helping my clients navigate multiple offer situations and come out on top. There's a few things that I think are at the core of any great negotiation, particularly when you add in the complicated element of multiple parties negotiating for the same home. First and foremost, set the expectation. This is not an argument. It's not a fight. It's not a battle. You really shouldn't see the other party in a negotiation as your adversary at all. They have terms in mind. You have terms in mind. We're trying to mirror those terms and see if there's common ground. And if there is, we want to get a deal together as amicably as possible and proceed to closing. So this is a partnership. You are constantly evaluating, what does the seller need? What do I need? And what am I willing to sacrifice to meet the seller's needs, assuming that you're not in perfect alignment? So this is the conversation we're having in the background of negotiations. I'm constantly asking my buyers, what is it that you aren't willing to sacrifice in the course of this negotiation? At some point, that usually becomes a dollar amount conversation. Show me the money! Buyers do have a maximum budget, and in some negotiations, that budget's not high enough. If somebody outbids you, there's not a lot that you can do unless you have perfect terms and it wasn't by that much. But at the end of the day, if somebody wants to buy a deal, that still happens in real estate. And somebody can, particularly if they're a cash buyer, overbid to buy the property because they want it. Assuming that that's not the case, let's say you're in a situation, could be super competitive, 5, 10, 50 offers, it doesn't matter. You're in one of the few positions with a hyper competitive offer, one that the seller is actually considering. Maybe there's 2 or 3 that are similar, but not quite the same. Here are the terms you should be thinking of, and terms that I use regularly to help clients win and to help clients stand out above the competition. Close date is critical to most sellers, but I think buyers often make the common flaw of assuming one way or the other what the seller needs. Some buyers assume that every seller wants to sell in 30 days. They want the quickest sale possible. In reality, some sellers need 60, even 90 days to find a home. Some sellers want to sell and lease back to you so that they can get 120, 160 days, somewhere in there where they can actually take time, sell the home, rent back for a little bit, find a new place to go. But if you don't ask those questions, you won't know that. And if you're just putting your offer out there and negotiating, assuming that sale price is all the seller cares about, you're deaf to an entire part of the conversation that might be critical when it comes to actually winning. So I'm always asking the question to sellers, what is your ideal close date? Is it 30 days? Is it 60 days? And I'm not saying, give me a range. What is your ideal date? The exact date you want. Will you tell me that? If you don't have one, that's fine, but give me a range and I'll communicate that with my buyers. It may or may not work. I can't move mountains. But if it does, I would rather know that so that we can present an offer that at least hits the close date that they want to see. If you're just starting your home search and you don't really know what to expect, I have another video all about buying a condo in Chicago that can probably answer some common concerns, questions that you might have. Check it out. Let me know if you have questions. I'm always happy to help with your search. A second part that buyers ignore, earnest money.
Oh my God, what is that?
Look, I'll be transparent. Earnest money doesn't come into play in most transactions. I guess that's sort of the nature of it, right? It's a bad behavior insurance premium of sorts that sits on the deal so that if the buyer behaves in a way they're not supposed to, the earnest money stays with the seller and they don't completely lose out on market time and lost income, etc. That said, most times buyers do what they're supposed to do, sellers do what they're supposed to do. Yes, deals fall apart, but they're not generally because of bad faith items. So the earnest money is an important thing to some sellers, but for buyers, they sort of dismiss it because of what I described. It doesn't come into play most times. It ends up being part of their down payment. It's like out of sight, out of mind. But for a nervous seller and for a seller in a market where things are in flux and buyers have proven that they behave badly at times, more earnest money is enticing. So if you're competing with somebody who's putting $1,000 or 1% earnest money, and you're willing to put 3.5%, 5% earnest money, absolutely that speaks volumes to that seller. And that same logic applies. Most likely, it's not going to come into play. It'll be part of your down payment. We won't ever have to talk about it again. But if you don't ask the question, if you don't know if that seller is a nervous seller, you might be under offering on earnest money and not really thinking about it. And in reality, it's sending the wrong message to that seller. Down payment conversations come up a lot. I take a pretty hard stance that the seller has no right to tell a buyer what they should put for the down payment. You have every right to put what you want to put down on a home. Your lender is going to loan the rest of the money, assuming you meet the financing guidelines, as long as your down payment and the amount you're being loaned equal the amount that you're buying the home for. The seller has no right to tell you that you should be putting more money down. So if you hear somebody push back on that, I would feel completely confident pushing back on them to say, my down payment is my decision. If they want to talk about earnest money, fine. They want to talk about the purchase price, you can only do what you can do. But down payment, that directly dictates your monthly cost of living. So make sure you're careful if you're going to start changing your down payment to meet some sort of seller demand. This last one is maybe my favorite trick. As is gets such a bad reputation in real estate. Buyers tend to think when they see a property that's listed as is that it's falling apart. It must have holes in the walls and it's completely going to need to be demolished because the seller listed as is. And sellers often list as is simply because they don't want to deal with how picky buyers have become. In 2022, buyers proved they will come after everything in an inspection.
But how do we go about fixing it specifically?
Take it one step at a time. Identify the problem, fix it. Identify another problem, fix it. Repeat as necessary until it's all fixed.
I'm talking peeling paint, loose nails, board creaks, anything and everything, particularly first-time buyers. No offense, guys. Ask for everything to be repaired. You are buying a used home. You do not get it in like new quality. And the way sellers have tried to communicate that is to just sell as is so that they can cut that conversation off in advance. The reality of most homes is probably in the middle. The work is more than most sellers would like to admit. It's less than most buyers want. But as is a really powerful term you can use if you're in a buy-side negotiation. And here's why. If you're sitting against 2 or 3 other offers, maybe value is equal on those offers, or even you're slightly below one of the other offers, but you're willing to offer as is. As is does not waive your right to conduct an inspection. You can still do so, and you can still cancel the contract if you find something concerning. As is does not waive your right to have an appraisal. You absolutely have the unit appraised. Everything in your contract is still protected. All you are agreeing to is to not ask the seller for more funds or repairs based on the results of your inspection. So if you're sitting with another offer that might be a couple $1,000s above yours, but the seller is really worried that that buyer is going to come after them for thousands of dollars in credits during inspection, your as-is offer becomes hyper competitive.
I'm doing the best at this.
All right,
So I love using as-is as the cherry on top in a really competitive deal. Maximize the offer price that you're willing to put out there. Figure out what you're comfortable with in terms of earnest money. Hit the close date that the seller wants to hit, and then slide in the as-is agreement to really make it a no-brainer for the seller to work with you. Maybe the most common question I'm asked during multiple offer situations, it's by the buyer, and it's, what should I pay for this home? Particularly after we get through that first offer, we know a best and final round is coming. The question inevitably comes up, Matt, what should I offer? I don't practice real estate by telling my clients what they should or should not do when it comes to making offers.
Don't tell me.
The way that I do guide my clients is sharing thoughts on relevant market value, the nature of the competitive situation, and facts that I do know in that specific negotiation. So when we look at market value, I want to make sure that what you are offering is in alignment with fair market value based on the comps we can pull within the last 6 months and the competitive nature of that situation. So it's fair to say if a home is selling around 500, you can see comps for 500. We now see multiple offers and think it might get bid up to 510 or 515. I'm relatively confident that would appraise out close to that value because there's so much interest in it with multiple offers and we have comparable data to support the value. If you want to offer 550, that's dangerous territory. You need to be willing to know that you're going to overpay and have cash to do so, or you just need to walk away because you really can't overspend on an asset if you have a loan involved with the bank involved unless you can cover that gap on your own. So my guidance is always on fair market value and where I think my clients need to be paying attention to overpaying in some circumstances. Let's assume that fair market value isn't coming into play. Yes, it might be getting bid up, it might even be over list price, but we're relatively confident it's going to appraise for what it's going to sell for. Now it becomes a question of what you want to pay for it, and I can't answer that question for you. I like to phrase it to my clients in the form of a challenge, if you will. The number you want to offer in a best and final situation is high enough that you won't lose sleep the next day if you lose by $1,000. You don't want to offer $500,000 if you really would have gone up to $505 and you're going to forever lose sleep because somebody else bought it at $501, $502, $503. You have to offer the top dollar amount that you are truly comfortable offering and won't lose sleep over. However, it's a fine line because equally, you don't want to wake up the next day after an accepted contract and have regret with how much money you're spending on your home. So you have to find the balance. You want to offer enough that you're not going to lose sleep knowing somebody might beat you by $1,000 or $2,000, but it was absolutely your max. And you don't want to overspend just to beat that person and then be forever uncomfortable with what you bought your home for. I can't answer that question for you. Your lender can help guide you on affordability, but ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your decision, and you're going to have to decide what you're comfortable with in these situations. So there will come a point when we say best and final is due. What would you like to offer? You should start mentally prepping for going through that exercise. This isn't on the contract, but I also think it's important to pay attention to the way you navigate negotiations. If you're using a real estate agent, your agent is going to navigate this whole process for you. It's important to pick someone you trust to do that because they are your representation through the process. They reflect your offer to the seller. So if they do so in a poor way, or maybe if they don't communicate well, things get lost in translation and your offer might not look as great as it actually is on paper. So make sure that you're working with your agent to present your offer in the best way possible. When I'm presenting offers come with the actual offer being shared via email and a request for confirmation that they were received. They come with a phone call to the agent so that I can discuss the terms that we're putting forward. Make sure that I've answered any questions they might have so that the seller can just review the terms of the offer and not worry about anything else. We mirror that with a pre-approval so that they know how your financing is coming along. Or if you're going to be offering in cash, I make sure to submit proof of funds as well. I also pay attention to using language that fosters good negotiation, right? So if you are flexible on close dates, I make sure to communicate that with the seller's agent so that they know when they're countering that there's some flexibility on close dates. The more that you communicate and the more you have a discussion with the other party and make it so it's an amicable process to move forward, the better your odds are that you're actually going to be able to negotiate and get under contract. So in that process, make sure that you're working with your agent to represent your offer well, to communicate terms clearly, and to proceed amicably at all turns. So those are the practical tips I have for you on negotiating in multiple offer situations. If you found value in this video and you haven't already, subscribe, like, share it with somebody else who might get value as well. And if you think I missed something, or if you use a tactic that I didn't talk about in your negotiation, leave it in the comments. I'm sure there's somebody out there who would value from hearing about your negotiation experience. We'll see you next time.